white people don't lie about using the N-word. They lie about not using the N-word. If she already said, I use the N-word in private. So no one pretends to use the N-word when they don't. So I actually didn't think that we needed that confession out of her. For me, as far as the other point here, I don't accept Stephen's analysis here of the donations to the campaign. Even if he is right that people were donating out of some political reaction to our hypersensitivity as a society, that's the wrong person to do it to. Do it to the person that's getting doxxed because they made a mistake 10 years ago. Do it to the person who rapped the N-word, on Gold Digger, and suddenly it has lost their ability to go to college. There's all kinds of people who we might say, even if we don't agree fully on the context, who we could say, hey, is a better example of the cause.
In today's video, Marc Lamont Hill absolutely destroys Steven Crowder in a heated debate on racism. While Crowder tried to hide behind free speech and deflections, Hill brought the receipts, laying out exactly why intent doesn't erase harm and why there's a long, painful history tied to slurs that can't just be brushed off in the name of edgy commentary. It wasn't just a takedown, it was an education. Marc Lamont Hill didn't just win the argument, he exposed the double standards that often get ignored in these debates. So let's dive in and watch how Marc Lamont Hill shuts down Steven Crowder in this heated debate.
But as you said, Piers, this is somebody who was using the word in the exact context that we're afraid of, or not afraid of, in the exact context that we're frustrated about, in the exact context that we think it's being used in. And so to dump money, almost $800,000 into her coffers, it ultimately rewards her for using that language. Imagine if an arsonist were to set a building on fire, and all three of us agreed that arson should not get the death penalty. I think we probably all agree on that. But if we were to then take $1 million and dump it in their GoFundMe to fund the arsonist's legal defense, and now they get off, is that the right way to do it? Is that the right call? There might be other ways to do it than to fund the person who's done something.
Mr. Crowder has very politely raised his right hand to speak, which I think is a rare example of good manners on this program. So, Stephen, your response.
Well, it's the Canadian in me, and actually, Dr. Hill and I have go a while back on Fox News, and like I said, he's always been a gentleman, and I do accept his. I saw him on a podcast later explaining that he didn't know who the guest was going to be. This is after the fact. And I have a much greater understanding now. I also get it. I will say, great, now do stabbing. And I think I know what the answer is going to be. Can we both, if we want to find common ground here, agree that, yeah, we really find ourselves at a weird point in this country when a bunch of people are giving to a lady who yells the N-word at a 5-year-old, and a bunch of people are giving to someone who is famous for no other reason than allegedly stabbing an innocent person? I know that we'll say it's because innocent until proven guilty, but this is the information that we have on both of these scenarios at this point in time. And what I'm discussing is the prescription moving forward. And one final thing. Here's the point that I was making that you didn't show in that clip too, was saying that it's racist for someone to say they would prefer to live in a predominantly white neighborhood, or they would prefer to live in their neighborhood, which is not black, I believe is what they said. And I don't believe it was necessarily her. I believe there was a man on the panel who said that, but you do. And I'm not going to attribute racism in your heart because only 4% of the population where you're placed in Los Angeles is black. I think we need to stop attributing and imbuing hatred, and I think we need to stop empowering them. But we do find ourselves at a point in this country where neither of these give, send, goes would have blown up if it existed 10 years ago. Why? How'd we get here?
Now, Crowder tried to frame the backlash against the woman caught shouting the N-word at a child as a case of hypersensitivity and made it all about the cultural shift toward cancel culture. But Marc rightly called out how twisted that defense is. This wasn't someone caught up in a lyric or a slip from years ago. This was a grown adult using a racial slur toward a black child in real time. That's not a nuanced issue, that's open racism. And as Marc pointed out, donating nearly $800,000 to this woman isn't a neutral gesture. It's a political statement. It's rewarding racism under the guise of anti-cancel culture. It's like throwing a parade for bad behavior just because you hate being told what's not acceptable. Crowder's whole "we should stop attributing hatred" argument falls flat when you consider what's actually happening. The fact is, hate crimes in the US have surged, with FBI data showing a 20% increase in race-based incidents in recent years, particularly anti-black hate crimes. That's the real-world context Marc is speaking from, not some abstract culture war. Marc's analogy of arson was spot on, supporting someone who does something blatantly harmful just because they're being held accountable doesn't make you principled, it makes you complicit.
I actually, well, Marc, I'll get you to respond. I have to say, in a way, completely different scenario, but how we got here, I think the same blame can be attached to how we got here to what is going on with the reaction to Joe Biden's health news. I made a point last night on X when that story broke. I was staggered by the instantaneous mockery, abuse, glee, ecstasy, desire for him to die that poured out in response to my tweet revealing this news about him having aggressive advanced stage 4 prostate cancer metastasizing to his bones, which is clearly an incredibly serious situation for a man of his age. And I just made the point, the guy's served his country for 50 years, whatever you think of it, this is the moment just to wish him well, isn't it? The answer was no, and has carried on being no for the next 24 hours in the most stunningly abusive, horrific, ghastly manner, totally inhumane to me. And I think the common theme, Stephen, of the two things is social media. Social media has, I think, inflamed social and racial tensions to a point where people just don't think the normal rules of society apply. They can be as disgusting and inhumane and racist and sexist and whatever they want to be as they like, with no accountability in almost every case. And we've become almost neutralized to that kind of thing. And part of the problem is that when people like you and me, and Marc, I'm sure, launch staunch defenses of the right to free speech, the wrong ears take it as the right to be openly racist and all these other things with no accountability. They misunderstand what free speech actually entails. It doesn't mean you're never going to be held accountable for what you say. When Shiloh Hendricks said that she said the N-word, whatever, this was her right to free speech. Yeah, but everybody else has a right to hold you accountable for it. And it's the second part of that equation, which is, I think, important. So, Stephen, your response to my thesis.
Yeah. Yes, I disagree. I think social media is a part of it, but I also don't think that we're dealing with an accountability culture as far as the country. I think we're dealing with a false accountability culture as far as the media and those in the establishment. You have myself, for example, who was demonetized, throttled on YouTube for simply using the term lesbian queer, someone who referred to themselves as a lesbian queer. It was a quote. Then moved over to Rumble, and after the Exodus Diageo, in charge of 80% of the world's advertising, told Rumble that it wasn't enough to demonetize myself, but that they wouldn't spend $1 of advertising on the entire platform, an alternative platform to YouTube, unless I was removed. You've had entire governments try and remove platforms for freedom of speech. This is not the accountability that people in the streets are calling for. What is being called for example, from people in the media, is a lie. They would rather hear a lie than the truth. And so you have people checking out. For example, someone's afraid to say, could be my black neighbors, but it's anecdotal. I'm not supposed to say the black friend thing. Move to the same neighborhood I have because it's safer and there's a stronger sense of community. But if you want me to lie to you and say, I picked that neighborhood and it just so happens to be more mixed or more white, but my neighbor's a former Dallas Cowboy, you can demand a lie, but the media is demanding the lie, not the American people. I am in no way concerned going down to a black neighborhood because I do it to the tune of hours, hundreds of hours of footage and hundreds of millions of views discussing these issues. The challenge I run into is when someone else, a third party, wants to play a game of telephone and tell them that it's racist. You can go and watch. I had not one, not two, but 10 people in this installment say, yeah, I think all lives matter. I think anyone who says that's white supremacy is out of their mind. They don't speak for us, the black community. I'd never know that unless I had that conversation with them. Very few people are doing it. You're demanding a lie.
Now let's talk about Crowder's example of black neighbors and safe neighborhoods. He dances around this racially coded language like it's subtle, but it's not. The data just doesn't support his implications. In fact, Studies have consistently shown that socioeconomic status, not race, is the biggest factor in crime rates. The actual systemic problem is redlining, segregation, underinvestment in black communities, and over-policing. The neighborhood safety argument ignores that these communities have often been deprived of the very resources that make neighborhoods safe. Crowder also throws out the old "I talk to black people and they agree with me" argument, which frankly doesn't hold weight. Cherry-picked interviews doesn't erase centuries of systemic racism or validate dismissing the lived experiences of marginalized groups. Piers is right. Free speech doesn't mean free from criticism, and when people like Crowder act shocked that saying something inflammatory leads to blowbacks, they're not defending free speech. They're demanding special treatment from criticism. That's not principle, it's just a privilege.
Of people.
Okay, Mark, your response.
Lots of things again. First, I think Stephen is, and I don't assign to you any ill intent, but you're comparing apples and oranges here when we talk about the Carmelo Anthony and the racist woman, I can't think of her name, video.
Lily Gaddis.
I think, as you pointed out
Shiloh
all day,
Hendricks.
no, not Lily Gaddis, but
you're talking about Shiloh Hendricks,
yeah. Shiloh Hendricks, yes. When you talk about context, I think we have to look at context in the context even of these GoFundMes, right? The people who are funding Carmelo Anthony, you can tell this from the comments, this isn't my guess, they're not saying good job. They're saying we don't believe that you're guilty. We don't believe that you've gotten a fair legal process, and so we're sending money to make sure that you get a proper legal defense because we don't believe that you are guilty of this crime. That is what they're saying. Now, you and I may look at the evidence and come to the same conclusion or a different conclusion, but they're not attempting to reward the behavior. They're attempting to challenge a system that they feel like is misrepresenting the behavior. In the case of the N-word and this woman, right, Charlotte, what's happening is quite different. They're not saying, hey, we feel like she's taken such a loss from her free exercise of free speech that we want to reimburse her for that. That would be a different argument. I still wouldn't want to do it, but that would at least be logically and morally consistent. When you look in the comments and when you talk to people who are funding that campaign, they are literally shouting the N-word. They are literally echoing the racial epithet, and that is different. That's why I say if this is really going to be a First Amendment cause, again, and not the lie that you're talking about, then let's invest in actual First Amendment causes and not this. And to your second point, I agree, and then I got you wholeheartedly. I mean, there's absolutely nothing wrong with making decisions about where you want to live. But there's a huge difference between saying, I want to live in a statistically safe neighborhood, or I want to live in a historically safe neighborhood, and I don't want to live around black people under any circumstances. And again, the latter is what came out in our conversation on the show the last time. And we're melding those two things as if they are the same, and then acting as if there's just no room for a white person, or a black person for that matter, to exercise any radical honesty about where they want to live. I ain't met a person yet that doesn't want to live in a safe neighborhood. I want to live in a safe neighborhood. I also want to live around black people. People can make their own choices, but let's not pretend they're the same thing.
Now, Mark makes an important distinction about housing choices. Crowder likes to reduce this issue to people just want to live in safe neighborhoods. Sure, who doesn't? But there's a world of difference between saying I want safety and saying I want to avoid black people. The former is a shared human desire. The latter is a racial discrimination, plain and simple. History backs this up too. Redlining and discriminatory housing policies kept black Americans out of certain neighborhoods for decades under the same excuse of safety. And we know those neighborhoods were often just as safe. The real concern was race. Crowder tries to frame all of this as some noble defense of free speech, but what Mark points out is that who you're defending and why matters. If you're only up in arms about free speech when someone uses the N-word, but stay silent when actual civil rights are being denied, like voting restrictions or police brutality, then you're not defending the First Amendment. You're defending your bias. So, yes, people can say what they want, but don't pretend that supporting hate speech under the guise of free speech makes you a hero of liberty. It just means you're okay with racism as long as it fits your politics.
Pause. Are you getting tired of getting half the story from biased news sources? One outlet says one thing and another says the complete opposite. How are you supposed to know what's actually true? That's where ground news comes in. It lets you compare how different media outlets, left, right, and center are covering the same story. So you can see the full picture instead of just the echo chamber. And here's the best part. Click the link in the description and get 40% off the Vantage tier, which gives you even deeper insights into media bias and political trends. Stay informed, think for yourself, and check out ground news in the description down below.